Welcome back to Learn to Draw Comics with me, your host, Nick Fights, in Lead-Based Studios. Today I'm going to be doing a little tutorial about eyes. I've got eyes. Eyes. He doesn't have much for eyes because they're all white. We're going to be drawing eyes in full detail. Eyes. So let's get to it. Let's draw some eyes. Draw eyes. Now, if you can draw circles, circles are spheres. You just haven't shaded yet. If you can draw basic shapes, you can draw eyes. Everything is basic shapes, so don't be daunted by it. So when it comes to drawing eyes, what we're really drawing is a round object that's stuck inside our skull. So if I start off with just a round object here, that's still not an eyeball, but it's the shape. Now I know the shape actually exists. If I'm drawing this into a full head, I'm going to be doing this along that eye line that I've put onto an actual skull shape if I was drawing a full-on head. From here, within this, I'm going to draw the actual iris, which would be the color part of the eye. And if I wanted this character to be looking straight at the camera, I can draw it as close to near dead center as possible, so that no matter where I am, I'm looking at the whole eyeball and it's looking at me. Even if the head was rotated and turned away, let's say that's the nose, and there's the cheek line, and that's the eyebrow, it still looks like it's staring at me. Because that's the truth of it. It is, if it's a character looking at us. So if I want to make it look like it's looking away, I just draw that iris off to the side. And as it's turning away, I want to make it more oval shape. Because the eyeball is a round object, as it twists and rotates and turns away, what was a perfect circle now turns to the side and becomes that oval. Something to keep in mind whenever drawing characters. The moment they're looking off-center, that iris becomes more of an oval. And then through that as well comes the pupil. Now in both scenarios, what I'm really doing is I'm drawing a circle about half the size of the original, and then even within the iris, I'm drawing the pupil about half the size of the iris. Because I look in that direction, looking straight at us, looks a bit wonky, but I'll jump back and forth from the two different examples. I'll pick the same light source though, and I'll start shading in these eyes. Now I know the eye is round, but we're looking straight at it. There's something we tend to miss. If I'm looking at it from the side, where the iris actually is covered up by a lens, and that lens domes out further than just the overall shape of the original circle. That extra dome shape over the iris is what collects the highlight. We don't see much of a highlight on top of the white surface area. We see a highlight here on top of that extra lens, or cornea, I believe is the official term for it. So as this light source is beaming off of the top of this eyeball, just like this light source, beam. As it's beaming off the top of it, we're going to select where it's hitting it here, along that top left part of it. Sunlight's coming from here and hitting that top left part of it. Now the light does something else very strange through the eye. What the light actually does is when it hits the top of that lens, it spreads out like a cone. So as it's hitting that highlight spot, it creates this cone shape, which then highlights the underside of the eye. So this underside over here, if we follow that same line across where it hits this highlight here, if I let the light readjust, there we go. So as it comes across and hits here, it's going to create kind of a cone shape coming through it. Now these parts, these bottom parts here of that iris will remain lighter than these top portions. Because another misconstrued thing is that the iris area is not just painted on the outside of that ball. No, it's actually cut away. So if you picture it like a cone, so here's this funnel shape kind of going away from our eye, and the top portion of that funnel is going to be in shadow. And that's where that extra lens on the surface comes in. Once that light hits that lens and it diffuses across, it creates a strong highlight on this bottom portion here. So we may end up getting a bit of a gradient area and then a strong highlight at the bottom. Meanwhile, a huge highlight here appears on the surface of the lens. So that's what we're looking at when we're really looking at an eye, and we're really just kind of recreating that to the best of our ability. So we've picked out where the highlight's going to be. We know the overall size of the iris. And we know where the highlight's going to be on the iris itself. So let's darken in that pupil, and let's leave that cutaway. And then just like the funnel shape down here, we're going to follow the direction of the actual muscles within the iris, because they do constrict and contract. That's how cat's eyes go from the big open circle down to the narrow, tiny little pointy thing like a domesticated house cat's eye. So those muscles do run from the inside to the outside, and we'll darken them up here at the top. And then this whole bottom side down here we can completely leave if we want to. Leave it highlighted like that, or we could just put in just slight subtle details so we know that there's still some muscles there functioning within that part of the iris. Now same thing for the eyeball turned away. I'm going to keep that same light source over here, top left. But now this highlight is going to be more of an oval because it's stretching along the contour of that dome shape going up and over the iris. Because that circle is stretching along that contour, even the highlight's going to look like an oval. So I'm picking that, following that from the light source. I'm going to designate about where the actual highlighted surface is on the inside of the eye. And because it's turned away, and because our light source is so low, that's the reason why we're getting this highlight on the right side. Where normally with like house lighting, let's say we have a light up here, the highlight's going to be down here on the bottom side of the eyeball. That's going to read more natural to your actual viewer if you do it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and darken up the pupil. And the reason why that's always dark, the reason why we never gradient the actual pupil, is the same reason for this funnel. It's cut away. There's this tunnel going back in. There's the cutaway. And what we're seeing inside this opening here, what we're seeing is all the inside of the eyeball. That light itself never really highlights. So when we're looking at the deepest, darkest spot of our own eye, what we're truly looking at is the vastness of nothing. We're looking into nothing. Which is why it's such a mesmerizing thing for people to look in each other's eyes and they get captivated in each other's eyes, because we're seeing someone and nothing all at the same time. So that's the mind-blown portion of drawing eyeballs. So let's put in our shading then for the muscles of the iris. I'll leave it darker around that highlight. And then we'll leave that bottom side, or in this case, the right side of it, where the highlight's hitting. Where it's hitting that lens, it's diffusing across the surface. There we go. So now, right now, all I've done is I've drawn floating eyeballs. These aren't existing in anyone's skull. They're just sort of sentient eyeballs floating on their own here. But what we need to do is we need to draw them on an actual face. So now I'll actually draw an eyeball as it exists behind the cover of an eyebrow and the eyelids, cheekbones, everything sort of holding it in place. So just over here, draw another circle, basic shapes. Circle, 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 oval, all basic shapes. That's it. Don't be intimidated. I'm going to draw this eye a bit more bashful. So instead of it being directly in the center, the iris is actually going to be a little bit lower and sort of turned away. And again, we're going for an oval shape because it's turned away. It's rotated away from the view. It's no longer direct. Put in our pupil as well. Here's going to be the fun part. When we add the actual eyelids, we have to think about the purpose of the eyelids, what they're actually doing. Our upper eyelid, it's like a baseball cap. It puts the eyelashes over top of that opening that receives light. It creates a little bit of shade for it so it can focus. So the upper eyelid is not up here over top of the iris. The upper eyelid is actually directly above our pupil, and sometimes even overlapping it, depending on how sad we are. It's not even worth taking in light today. I don't even feel like taking in light. It's sad. Really low eye line. We lift it up to the top here. Just slightly cover up the top of the actual pupil. That's going to read as more natural. They're not fully startled. If you're startled, you can see the whites of the eyes above the iris. If they're kind of relaxed, it grazes right across the top of the iris and just barely touches the top of that pupil. Now the bottom eyelid will work kind of like a hammock. It's going to fit just on the underside of our iris. Like a hammock, it's going to look like a ball or an oval sitting on a hammock. Not fully sunk into it, just sitting on it, like a bird on a wire. So now if I'm drawing this on an actual face, right about the dead center of where our iris is going to be on the inside, that's going to be the inside of the actual eye. But because our head is a three-dimensional shape, as it wraps around, it's going further back. So I'm going to create that perspective and lift it up just a little bit higher on the outside. That's going to be where these two lids connect. These two endpoints, those are going to be easy to find. But what's most important is where the eyelids are overlapping the iris. So no matter where we move this iris around, those eyelids are going to do the exact same thing, and then we just draw those points back to those original openings. But the most important thing is the iris. The eyelids are based off of where the iris is, and we already know they're going to be drawn back to a closing point. So that's all we got to do at this point. Just draw them back to their closing. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this extra eye here so I can keep the demonstration going. Embrace the erase. Don't run from it. Doesn't mean you made mistakes. Just gets rid of the stuff you don't need. That's all. Now another thing that happens with eyelids, we have this brow attached to it. There's extra tissue up there pressing down on it. So as the eyeball disappears into the actual skull, there's going to be a little bit of an overlap here on the inside of the eye. Sometimes drawing these lines on people adds a bit of age, so if you're drawing a younger character, don't worry so much about putting in that overlap there. But you don't necessarily have to draw crow's feet on an eyeball just to make someone look old. Look at my wrinkles, I'm so old. Nope, sometimes all you need to do is just illustrate the extra bit of folds and wrinkles and rolls here or there to show their distinguished features. Really frame the actual brow. So there's where the brow would sit above it, just very loosely, and this right here separates the shape of the ball as it's disappearing into the shape of the brow, which is lifting up in this direction. I'm just throwing on some contour shapes here so you can actually see how the skin would be draping and wrapping up and over the ball and then changing direction to go up into the actual eyelid, or the forehead. So then the same thing for the bottom side of it. I'm drawing these sort of contour shapes here, then those would sort of fan out across the cheek line. So you actually see the contour of how the skin hits the eyeball, wraps up and over it, and goes back to its regular scheduled program. Let's go up the forehead. Alright, so let's go ahead and add on those details that we'd already sketched before on this floating sentient eyeball. So same light source, we'll pick this light source just up there. So we get a highlight on the top of that lens. It means we'll have this lighter side down here at the bottom. This should read more natural now. We'll fill in our pupil solid black. Do the details of the iris up around the top a lot darker, and make them lighter as they come down to where that highlight is. And we still haven't done anything regarding eyelashes. The eyelashes, again, are just an accent to the actual eyeball. When doing eyelashes, remember that they are doing similar to these contour lines. These contour lines are draping and going with the skin. The eyelashes are going perpendicular to the skin. They're leaving the surface of the opening of that skin and coming forward. And here, they always have that slight curl upwards. So although they're initially leaving, coming away, they start to curl out and away. So I'm going to start putting these in and thicken them up just about where the actual eyeball is, because that's where it's most important. And then thin them out. And if I want to do it comic book style, I'm going to clunk them together so you have these big clunky style eyelashes instead of drawing every single hair. So now I'm going to go ahead and embrace the eraser and get rid of all these contour shapes. Get rid of the basic shapes. Just get rid of the stuff I don't need. So you can see how that's starting to come together right there. I can round off a little bit on the inside of these lids here so you actually see the ball on the inside. There we go. This person looks a bit sad, looks a bit down and out. And again, it's something you should play with. You should work around with where the upper eyelid lands, because as we draw that in, and here's the pupil, as we draw that eyelid in different places, it's going to read for different emotions, just like cartooning. So practice around with a bit of cartooning, very loosened, exaggerated forms to try to capture what kind of mood your character needs, then put on the details from there. If this character really does need to be scared, well, you know, establish that first, then put on those details. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial regarding how to draw eyes. Remember to look in the mirror a lot if you have to. Use direct reference right there. Open up your eyelids. See your pupils for how they actually expand and shrink down when they need more light and when they don't need as much. Your eyelids will do all that. Your pupils will do all that. Your eyelids will kind of protect your eyes. So play around with it a little bit. Draw loosely. Don't worry about making mistakes. Embrace the eraser. Don't be intimidated by what you're drawing, because everything is basic shapes. Stick around, we'll have more videos coming up for you guys, more tutorials and things. Shoot me a line if you have a suggestion for a tutorial or a challenge, and I'll sketch it up. So this has been Learn to Draw Comics with your host, Nick Feitz, here in Lead Base Studios. Stick around, draw more. I'm about to have a sneeze. Hold on a second.